Gentlemen, you are live.
All right, appreciate that. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Commissioner's Conversation in the age of COVID-19. This is, I don't know, this is probably conversation number 5 or 6 at this point. It is Tuesday, or no, yeah, I guess today is Tuesday. No, Thursday. Today is Thursday, May 7th. My name is John O'Grady. I am president of the Franklin County Board of Commissioners. We started these online conversations right after COVID-19 or coronavirus hit Ohio. We had 2 reasons in mind. We wanted to make sure that families not only learned about what is available to them through Franklin County, but the need and what they need to know and where they needed to go to find out this information. That's because all of us are fighting coronavirus on 2 fronts: the spread of the virus and the economic effects that the virus has on everybody. Unfortunately, the numbers are continuing to rise. Today, as of today, here in Ohio, there are 21,576 cases of coronavirus with 1,225 deaths in the state of Ohio. In Franklin County, we have 3,237 cases with 99 deaths, and the numbers just continue to rise. And that's with our first case in Ohio was on March 9th. One thing to bear in mind that you want to keep in mind as we continue over the next several weeks. The numbers in the state, in the state of Ohio, the state continues to make a purposeful effort to continue testing, and those numbers are going to continue to increase over the next couple of weeks based on the state's efforts and Franklin County's efforts to continue to test as many folks as possible. So take that into consideration. In addition, the state and many local governments are struggling financially. The governor recently announced the need to cut $775 million in the state's budget, and cities around Ohio have already started and counties have already started furloughing workers. Today, my guest is City Attorney Zach Klein. Zach has pushed many criminal justice changes over in the recent months and years. Before and after this outbreak, and he has come up with new ways to offer some help. I always like to point out that we encourage folks to share these online conversations. So if you can, as we head forward, always be willing to share the fact that we're on here, on your Facebook page and on your social media pages. But I also want to say again now that it's definitely the case here. We have a lot of good information, and we will be scrolling information during the conversation. So you'll see a lot of good information exchanged during this conversation. A couple of things that you should know. Number one, if you have questions either for City Attorney Klein or myself, now's the time to go ahead and start asking those questions on Facebook Live. Number one. Number two, tonight's conversation is going to be a little bit abbreviated. We have some scheduling issues for tonight. So instead of going for the full hour, we're probably going to end somewhere between 30 and 40 minutes. So we're going to go ahead and get right into it. Welcome, Mr. Klein, my good friend, Zach. So let's start with the first question. So Zach, if you could, please start by letting the viewers know a little bit about the City Attorney's Office. I'd imagine there's a lot of things that the people are going to need to know about the full extent of your office. So if you could just give us a quick overview about the City Attorney's Office and what it does.
Well, thanks for having me on, John, Commissioner President O'Grady, dear friend. So yeah, the City Attorney's Office, I've been fortunate enough to be the City Attorney since January of 2018. I won my election in November 2017. So essentially there's 4 buckets to the City Attorney's Office. I think the one we'll talk about a lot tonight is the first bucket, and that's the criminal division. It's the prosecution division. That's where we prosecute misdemeanor crimes in the city of Columbus. That ranges everything from traffic violations all the way up to domestic violence, something as very serious as domestic violence. The Franklin County Municipal Court is one of the busiest courts in the country, certainly one of the busiest courts in the state. It is actually the busiest court in the state. We do about 110,000 prosecutions a year when you look at traffic all the way up to domestic violence. So it is a very busy docket. And about half my staff are prosecutors or prosecutorial support staff. So about 150 people work for the city attorney's office. The second bucket is just being the general lawyer for the city. That is labor relations, litigation, claims, real estate, and everything in between. So we're the lawyers for public utilities. We're lawyers for the public service department, but we're also lawyers for the police department and the division of fire. So if you're one of the 9,000 city employees or the mayor or the city council, my office is your lawyer. The third is one that I think our community is very fond of, and it's a very important branch of our office, and that's the zone team. There are 5 police zones in the city of Columbus, and my predecessor, Rick Pfeiffer, great idea of his. He assigned 1 lawyer to every police zone to work hand in glove with area commissions, civic associations, block watch groups to identify drug houses, bad businesses. And so it is the most outward facing portion of my office. It's where you see a lot of our news releases about shutting down drug houses in neighborhoods, about shutting down bad businesses and nuisance abatement. The hotel motel work that we've done in conjunction with the industry and the division of police and neighborhood groups, where hotels and motels were really criminal enterprises, some primarily on the 161-71 corridor. There were criminal enterprises where human trafficking and drugs and violent gangs were being run out of. We shut those down through the zone initiative. So it's a very important office function of cleaning up our neighborhoods. And then the final is a section of the office that I created when I became the city attorney, and that's our solicitor section. This is where we get involved in a more proactive stance in standing up for civil rights, women's rights, things that are important to the values of all of us collectively in Ohio. So the cases that we've done out of this section, we have sued President Trump and the administration over some healthcare issues because of the threat against the elimination of protections against pre-existing conditions. The threat of eliminating Medicaid expansion, especially in a state like Ohio that's decimated by the opioid epidemic. So we actually are leading a litigation called Columbus v. Trump. It's joined by Cincinnati, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Chicago. And we're the lead plaintiff in that case. We recently overcame a motion to dismiss. The government obviously eager to dismiss this lawsuit because they don't want it to proceed. We won in federal court. That case will proceed. And we're actually going to be able to get all of the evidentiary discovery of the reasons the Trump administration has intentionally sabotaged the Affordable Care Act. So we'll be curious as we go through that record to find out the motives and the reasoning of why they're pushing junk plans, for example, or why they've decided to do technological upgrades to their ACA open enrollment website right in the middle of open enrollment. So we're going to find out the answers to those. And we're interested in making sure that everyone has good quality health care, and this is an important lawsuit to take advantage of that. We're also doing some work on behalf of all the cities across the country in defense of Planned Parenthood and important Title X funding. This is funding that flows to many of our community health centers across the state that goes beyond reproductive health. It involves a lot of different types of healthcare and federal funding that is associated with it. And we wrote a brief that was signed by nearly 40 cities ranging from Los Angeles to New York that signed on to the city of Columbus's brief to make sure that important Title X funding stays in place. And then just one other thing that I'll note is a lot of our policy is driven out of that office. I'm no longer the council president, so I don't make policy officially, but certainly, the work that we're doing to get guns out of the hands of folks who have domestic violence convictions, protecting home rules so that cities can make decisions for themselves based on what their needs are, because what's good for Columbus may not be the same as what's good for Belpre, Ohio, where I grew up from. And that's what's great about home rule, is that each city can make a decision for itself. And we're leading the way to ensure that each city, whether it's rural or urban, can make its decision that's best for them. So those are the 4 buckets that my 150 folks, that lawyers and staff, and that they work in the city attorney's office.
That's great stuff. Great information. Appreciate that. So wanted to get into another area that's I know is very important to you and is great work that you and your staff have been doing. It's also very obviously very important to the county and the county commissioners based on a number of for a number of reasons. You've been involved throughout this crisis through the outbreak in helping to reduce the jail population. And reducing the jail population is really important for a number of reasons. It's a difficult process, and I want to talk to you about it. First, though, I want to set the stage, so to speak, to bring our viewers back in time a few weeks. When the outbreak hit, the governments had to find new ways to operate and ensure that we're all maintaining social distancing. It's an unprecedented challenge. We need to be thoughtful and yet act very quickly. Franklin County jails were one of the areas of concern. We knew that the jails and the prisons provide an environment where many people are in constant close contact. In other words, the jails are an environment that can allow the virus to spread very easily unless we're very careful. So if you could, please tell us about the decision-making process. How did you help the county to decide who would be released, and also let our viewers know what a rough estimate of the inmates that we're talking about in terms of the numbers, if you would.
Sure. That's a great question. So where a lot of cities, counties, and states across the country were scrambling once coronavirus hit to figure out what they're going to do with their jails, I can say for the things that I had direct control over, which are misdemeanor crimes in the city of Columbus, I don't control felony crimes. I don't control juvenile, but I do have authority over misdemeanor crimes in conjunction, of course, with judges and the sheriff. We were, I think, very well ahead of the curve. And that's not because we were planning for a pandemic to come, because, frankly, it's hard to predict a pandemic unless you were receiving national security briefings, maybe back in November of 2019. Obviously, I was not. So really the work that we have been doing is more of a global criminal justice reform initiative to improve the criminal justice system and make it more equitable and fair through those improvements. And we, through several policy initiatives, I believe, over the past 2.5 years, really set the stage to make sure that only the right people we believe should be in jail are in jail to begin with. So whereas other cities and counties across the country were going through the list of inmates trying to decide, well, should we let this misdemeanor out of jail or this misdemeanor? We really did not have to go through that exercise because of the policies that we have focused on over the past 2.5 years that allowed us and ensured us that only the appropriate people are in jail. Now, who are those people? These are people that have committed domestic violence. These are people who have committed sex crimes. And these are people that have multiple OVIs or DUIs, driving under the influence. Obviously, how the sheriff takes care of the jail in conjunction and supervision of the county and the county commissioners is very important to make sure that despite the fact that you are incarcerated, that there is social distancing, there is good hygiene, because you are incarcerated, obviously against your will. It's the whole purpose of incarceration, but to make sure that you are healthy and safe. But as far as ensuring that the appropriate people are incarcerated, it certainly is a balance, but the notion and idea that we're going to let someone who has committed domestic violence to come back into their house that they originally were arrested from and then be required to stay there at a stay-at-home order with their victim is one that, to me, does not promote community safety. It certainly doesn't protect the victim, doesn't protect the victim's family. And so, really focusing on the folks that we think deserve to be incarcerated allowed us to be ahead of the curve where many cities and counties were struggling. At one point, and I haven't seen the numbers in the latest week, but at one point there were roughly 1,375 total inmates in the Franklin County Jail. That includes misdemeanors, felonies, and others. And out of those, roughly 175 were misdemeanors. Now, that doesn't mean all 175 are the city of Columbus, is because it's a county-wide jail. So you think of this, our suburban friends, Whitehall, New Albany, Dublin, a couple of dozen of those 175 are likely attributable to those suburban jurisdictions. So even if you take 25 and it gets it down to 150 as a rough guesstimate, 150 people out of a city of 900,000 people, I think is a really remarkable a statement to the work that we've done. Obviously, we would strive for a day where no one's in jail, where folks can live according to law and not commit crimes and not be a danger to society. But that's really not the realistic world that we live in. But to think that we've made measures and put in measures in place where 150 inmates roughly out of 900,000 people in the city of Columbus, I think that is a testament to the fact that we've struck the balance of promoting community safety and ensuring that only those who are a danger to victims or just to the public are the ones that are incarcerated.
So we started the pandemic back, in the beginning of March, middle of March, with just over 1,900 inmates in the jail population. So we had north of 1,900. I don't know the exact number. We currently have a little over 1,300. So we've reduced the jail population by more than 600 over the course of a couple of months' time. You were a large part of making that happen, along with many people. Michael Daniels, who's the director of our Justice Programs, Justice Policy and Programs Unit, the county prosecutor, the sheriff, a lot of judges. I mean, there's been a whole host of folks who have been a big help in making this happen. It's been a concerted effort. You have been a very vocal voice in making this a reality. There's no question. But the point is, we need to and we need to continue to make this a reality. I've been pushing Michael Daniels, our director of Justice Policy Program, to do all we can to put policies in place now during this outbreak, because my concern is that we don't do anything to formalize, and I challenge you as well, Zach, that we don't put anything in place now to formalize what is keeping our population low now, and that once this is over, and if we haven't formalized anything, then the jail population will go back to what it was before. We need to do what is necessary to make sure that folks who don't belong in jail aren't going there to start with. We did an exercise back in 2008, 2009, 2010, where we were doing we did a bunch of charrettes. We were doing a jail survey because we were thinking at the time that there may be a need at some point to build a new jail. Obviously, we are in the midst of the construction of a new jail, but we were talking about the possibility of a design of a new jail. And so we had people's heightened awareness. We had all the judges thinking about the way they were sentencing. We had all of the local law enforcement of all the jurisdictions in Central Ohio thinking about where they were taking folks. Instead of just taking them to the jail, we had them thinking about, well, maybe I should be taking this person to Maryhaven instead of taking them to jail. Maybe I should be taking, to all the different places that they could be taking instead of the jail. We had the city attorney at the time thinking about, just everybody all along the process. And so bed nights went down from, at the time, an all-time high of like 2,200 bed nights, daily bed nights, went down to about 1,600 or 1,700 at the time. And then as soon as this was over, 6-8 months down the road, a year down the road, all of a sudden the bed nights went back up from 1,600 or 1,700 to 2,100, 2,200. And it didn't take very long for it to happen. I don't want to see that happen again once we're done with this. And I know you don't either. You and I have talked about this. And I know Michael Daniels does. I know nobody does. Nobody wants to see this happen. But I think it will take us formalizing some policies now during this time to ensure that doesn't happen going forward.
No, I agree with you. I have talked to my office about making an informal log of the policies that we have put in place since the coronavirus came to ensure that we continue those policies post-coronavirus. One of them that comes to mind, John, is in the domestic violence realm. We wanted to make sure, using our bully pulpit in the city attorney's office, that victims knew that help and hope was still available despite the state's lockdown order. Domestic violence is on the rise around the world. Even the United Nations has spoken out about domestic violence being on the rise. And it's certainly on the rise in our own community. And so in talking with our domestic violence unit, and I give them the utmost credit for the ingenuity here, after they saw me talking on the news about calling the Choices hotline, which is obviously very important. It's a 24-hour day, 7-day hotline. They took a step back and said, well, most of these folks and victims are now living and locked in the house with their abuser. How are they going to step away and make a phone call to the Choices hotline? Again, like adapting to the real world aspect of living in the COVID-19 society. And so we created a text option. And it's not something that's super high tech. We signed up for a Google Voice phone number that goes to one of our office cell phones, where a staff member can respond to texts to help victims of domestic violence that maybe are in earshot of their abuser. Actually shoot a text to the office, and we can get him or her the help that they need in the hopes that they can escape that situation. That's something that we are going to expand and grow upon in a post-pandemic world, because not only does it make sense for the person who's captive with their abuser in a COVID-19 situation, but it's also reflective of the fact that many millennials don't even make phone calls anymore. Like a lot of folks, even if you're a millennial and a victim of domestic violence or intimate partner violence, you're a lot more comfortable texting. So it's a reflection of just changing times. And like these policies and others that you and the county and the city are working on are ones that we need to take note of, just as you're saying, so they can continue in the post-COVID-19 world.
Well, so we moved right into that nicely, because that was, obviously the next place that I was headed. Have you noticed any other, domestic violence was certainly, one of the places I was headed, but have you noticed any other types of crimes that are either on the rise or on the decline in this COVID-19 world?
One thing that's concerning to me is the number of homicides that we've seen in the city of Columbus, despite this pandemic. That's something that we have to continue to work on as a city. And I really applaud the work that the Division of Police are doing in trying to solve those homicides. And another one is just really the work that we're doing on rehabilitation as it relates to drug use. A lot of folks believe that folks who are in mere possession of drugs, again, we're not talking about traffickers, we're talking about possession. A lot of folks believe that those individuals should be incarcerated. And the reality is that's probably the last place they need to be. They need help, they need rehabilitation. I'm a firm believer that the criminal justice system is one where we've done the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And that's why, the war on drugs has been a complete failure. There's really very few statistics that you can point to in the United States that show what we're doing with the war on drugs is actually effective. We need to give those who are addicted to drugs the help that they need while punishing the traffickers. Like that is a balanced approach, and why I've actually teamed up in a bipartisan way with Ron O'Brien, a Republican Franklin County prosecutor, to promote a statewide effort that's called Senate Bill 3. It's supported by the state Senate president, who's a Republican, as well as many other Republican and Democratic state senators. We have a lot of work to do in this space. And in order for us to do a better job, we have to be able to differentiate those who are afflicted by addiction and those who are trafficking those drugs into our community. Addiction is not new. Addiction has plagued communities of color and rural America for decades. And frankly, no one really cared about it until opioids and heroin came on the scene, and it started afflicting suburban folks. And now that suburban folks are experiencing drug overdoses and deaths in their own family, they've taken a step back and realized that addiction is real. So how do we capitalize on this moment? this moment where Republicans and Democrats in a very partisan world have all come together in criminal justice reform to improve the system. I think we capitalize on it by recognizing the fact that if we're going to break the cycle of poverty and the cycle of incarceration, then we need to look at drugs and our war on drugs and criminalizing low-level possession, which has yielded for the past 30 years no discernible result of improvement. Really go after the traffickers. We need to hammer the traffickers, but we need to make sure that those afflicted by addiction get the help they need. As a matter of fact, if you are afflicted by addiction and you go into the jail, chances are you have an even higher likelihood of overdosing and dying, because the days that you do spend in jail are ones where you do detox. And the moment you get out, if you're not given the proper treatment, the moment you get out, you seek your first high, your tolerance is lower, and you have a significantly higher likelihood of dying. So we need to give folks the help that they need in order to break the cycle of crime. And I'll just give you like just this random example that I think will that illustrates kind of what I'm talking about. If the folks that are using drugs and that are addicted to drugs are committing crimes, obviously they need to be punished for the crimes that they're committing, in addition to evaluating their drug use. But the reality is, if we don't take a step back and treat them for their underlying addiction, then what's going to stop them from continuing the crimes to feed that addiction? So we have to take a step back. We have to use a common sense approach to treat the underlying reasons why people commit crime if we want to be serious about making our community safer. Because until you treat the underlying reason of why that person's committing a crime, then we're not going to be able to break that cycle of crime. And I think we all share the common goal is we want to make our community safer. We want to improve the criminal justice system to make our community safer, to make it more fair, but as well as to give economic opportunity for those families and defendants and victims who deserve it.
So, so let's go back to talk about domestic violence for a little bit. You've done a huge amount of work as it relates to domestic violence, and during obviously during this time, during this outbreak, and you talked earlier about the fact that folks are this is a really difficult issue now that folks are living with their abuser in some ways, in some cases, and so one, what's the there's a hotline, and I think staff will post this on Facebook Live at the moment. They'll post the number. It's a 24/7 line, and it's for choices. So they'll post that number if they haven't already. They're going to post it up there. And then there's also a number for your office, if I'm not mistaken. And they'll post that number as well. And I want to remind the viewers to continue to submit your questions on Facebook Live during this time. So there's also a larger global discussion of domestic violence recently, or been a larger global discussion. Zach, you did a virtual seminar recently.
I did. I actually done two.
That. What's that? You've done two?
I've done two. I did one. One was just today. Yeah, one was just today, and the other. So two. The first one I did was last week, and it was with several international and global retailers. We're talking like Levi Strauss, Gap, and others. And it was with some of their C-suite executives talking about how they can use their communication and tools, and especially with the shutdown order, how they can use their tools to alert employees about the resources that are available in various jurisdictions to where their warehouses are and distribution centers, which I think was a really great tool for them a really great discussion for them to figure out what tools they can spread the word. Because as I said at the top, really this is about information. Like it's about education and allowing victims and giving them the tools and the knowledge to know that help is still available despite the coronavirus. And so we're now working with some of our local businesses in our corporate community and business community to do something similar to get the message out to them through their various business channels as well. Today's conference was about the intersection of guns and domestic violence. And as many folks on this Facebook Live likely know, that a victim of domestic violence is a significantly higher chance of homicide if their abuser possesses a gun. And so it was a group of prosecutors across the country, nonpartisan, bipartisan, talking about the intersection of many stay-at-home crimes. The first was domestic violence that we talked about. We also talked about child abuse and others, but it was the intersection of guns and the fact that with all these stay-at-home orders, that crimes and the reporting of crimes could be down. Because victims are afraid to report them, depending on how various police agencies or governmental agencies may react across the country. One thing that stood out to me that I think is concerning for the city of Columbus is that there's a woman named Dr. Sorensen who spoke prior to our presentation with the city of Los Angeles on domestic violence, and she said that across the country, domestic violence is up, but there seems to be across the country a trend to where calls are down. And she expects a deluge of calls once the abusers start going back to work. She expects the system to be overrun because victims will then have the breathing room to be able to make the calls. That's concerning to me because in the city of Columbus, our numbers are stagnant. So if we're holding steady at about 60 domestic violence arrests per week, and the Division of Police are still making these arrests, and we're working with them on that, and I applaud them for that effort. Our Division of Police have been a wonderful partner in this. But if we're holding steady at 60 arrests per week, roughly, and the Dr. Sorensen is concerned about a deluge of cases coming post-pandemic, then we should embrace ourselves and be prepared for really an onslaught of cases that I hope does not happen, because I'm hoping that folks aren't in abusive relationships. But we need to embrace the fact that they likely are, and we need to be prepared to hold those abusers accountable and help the victims.
Well, this is, there are many things that we are all dealing with in this difficult time. This is just one more that is a very difficult situation. There's another thing that is fairly new in Franklin County. Let's change the topic and move on, because we're going to be running low on time here. So I want to move on to a couple of other things that we want to talk about before we get finished here. So there's a brand new thing that's we're dealing with in Franklin County. And that's video arraignments. Your office handles about 90% of the cases in Franklin County Municipal Court. So your staff has been working with us regularly on this. From your perspective, how are the video arraignments working out?
So we're not quite to the video arraignment stage in Muni Court. Common Pleas Court has started, and we are working with the judges directly, as well as the prosecutor and Common Pleas Court, to be able to learn the lessons that the Common Pleas Court is doing as we craft our municipal court policy. But I think in municipal court, this is going to be a really positive step forward. The judges, I think, rightfully so, embrace the technology that's available and understanding that there's a way that we can work system-wide to change the way that we're doing arraignments to make it more efficient, but while still ensuring justice for all those involved. And so we will continue to work with them, the judges, the clerk, the sheriff's office, to make sure that we have the best arraignment policy, our video arraignment policy in the state of Ohio in municipal court. But it will be a work in progress. And as everything that's new, there'll be hiccups and we'll work through them. But the good news is it's a collaborative effort and no one's trying to do it alone. And we're all trying to figure out how we can learn the lessons of what other jurisdictions are doing, not reinvent the wheel, and do it correctly.
Well, we're excited about it. It's something that's been coming for quite a long time, doing it in many jurisdictions throughout the country. There's two other programs that I know that can be useful to our residents that I'd like to hear more about. Can you tell us about the diversion program that you started?
Yeah, absolutely. The diversion program goes back to what we were talking about earlier, John, and that is the root reasons of crime. Like, what are those socio-determinant reasons of why people commit crime? And this is a program that doesn't excuse criminal conduct. As a matter of fact, it holds the defendant accountable, which is what should be done in the criminal justice system. But not every answer should be incarceration. If we're looking at a way to improve the criminal justice system, to ensure that we get maximum community safety, then we have to take a step back and look at the underlying reasons why people commit crime. So we created the first of its kind in the country diversion program that is almost a year old, that focuses on big box shoplifting. So we've worked with our big boxes. It's the Myers, the Krogers, the Lowe's, the Home Depots of the world. And we created a program where we partnered with a third-party healthcare organization that does a 36-question screen of defendants. Now, these defendants isn't your first offense, because we already have a program for that. But it's also not your 9th, 10th, 11th offense either, because at that point, you're likely a serial shoplifter, and there's broader problems and concerns that we need to deal with. So these are the tweener offenses, from 2 to about 8 or 9 offense roughly. And instead of easily incarcerating or convicting these individuals, which we can do, these cases typically are pretty easy to prove. They're on closed circuit television. They're witnessed by several people. The goods that are alleged to be stolen are found on them. Instead of just simply going straight to conviction, where these folks go back out in the community and steal again, we've taken a step back and to say, like, why are they stealing? Is it because of a drug addiction or a mental health problem? Or is it because of poverty, lack of job, lack of transportation, food insecurity, housing insecurity? And what we've done with this third-party healthcare organization is, through this diversion program, depending on what each individual defendant's needs are, we give the tools to the defendant to help themselves, to improve their lives. So, for example, something as easy as, why are you stealing? Well, I'm stealing because of a drug addiction and I'm hungry. Well, did you know that there's a food pantry right around the block from where you live? So we're connecting people with real resources in our community, so that we're not doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. So the only way we're truly going to make our community safer is to treat those underlying reasons why people commit crime. We've seen an overwhelming, what's that?
Should have been a county commissioner.
We've seen an overwhelming response and nearly 100% participation. The reason I say 100 is because at one point there was one woman that was hard to get a hold of. So we're talking potentially one person out of dozens and dozens and dozens that have gone through it. Again, it's narrowly tailored to big box shoplifting, but my hope is to expand it to other crimes as a way to truly make our community safer. I don't want taxpayer dollars to be going to incarcerate individuals. I want taxpayer dollars to go to lift up individuals so they can become tax-paying citizens again.
That's exactly right. Well, it's a great approach. So tell us more about what you're doing with minor marijuana misdemeanors. So
over the course of the summer, the state legislature, I think rightfully so, recognized that many economic policies on the federal level were crushing farmers. And the reality is that's probably true. And so the legislature stepped up and wanted to create a new commodity for farmers to be able to sell, so they have another opportunity to make a buck and support their farm, something that I wholeheartedly agree with. And so the legislature created hemp as an exception in the state of Ohio for farmers to grow. And in that bill, I'm sorry.
Even a blind.
I'm sorry.
Even a blind.
Yeah. And so under the state law, hemp is 0.3 or less THC, and marijuana is greater than 0.3% THC. Well, at the time, there really wasn't widespread testing to determine the difference between hemp and marijuana. Prior to this law coming into effect, the mere presence of THC was marijuana. So to determine the amount, you needed additional testing. So that factor, in addition to the fact that our city council at the time recently passed a law in the city of Columbus that made it a small monetary fine for marijuana possession, in addition to the fact that marijuana possession has disproportionately impacted communities of color in a way that it hasn't impacted white folks. All those factors together, we made the affirmative decision that we were not going to prosecute misdemeanor marijuana possession in the city of Columbus. We are sticking with that policy. I don't think that the city of Columbus should be spending hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on attesting a piece of equipment that can determine whether someone has a baggie of marijuana and whether that has 0.3% THC or not. I think our money can be used elsewhere to improve community safety, to make our neighborhoods stronger, and that we should really be going after the traffickers. And now that BCI has the testing capability, I'm hoping the county prosecutors whose jurisdiction it is to go after traffickers in large amounts of marijuana, that they can use that as a tool to hold large amount traffickers accountable. But the low level everyday user in the city of Columbus, we're not prosecuting those cases. Now, I want to be abundantly clear, John, just to make sure everyone understands, marijuana is still illegal. The Ohio Revised Code still makes it illegal. So that means that a cop using reasonable suspicion under the United States Constitution has a right to continue to use that reasonable suspicion for example, a stop. So that if you are searched and they find a gun, or they find child pornography, or they find something on you, like those searches are, as long as they're constitutional, those searches are still permissible. It just means that we're not going to prosecute you for a little bit of marijuana.
Gotcha. All right, so we're about out of time. I want to give you, just before I close up, I want to give you last couple minutes. Tell folks a little bit about yourself, your previous record, your previous, what have you done? I know you worked in the White House. I know you've done other things previous to becoming the city attorney. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then maybe a few thoughts on criminal justice reform, criminal justice changes, and then we'll close up.
So I'm a kid. I know you're from Columbus through and through, John.
I was born in Klein.
That's true. I'm sorry, but you went to
I'm
Reedy.
from Columbus for the last 55 of
Yeah. You went to Reedy. I know. I've seen your wrestling photo. But I'm a kid from Belpre, Ohio, which is down on the river across from Parkersburg, West Virginia. It's a small community, about 5,000 people. Belpre Golden Eagles. There's a high school there. We got excited when Parkersburg, which is the big city across the river, we had two bridges that we shared with Parkersburg, John. One was the free bridge and one was the 35-cent bridge, which I heard is 50 cents. But we got really excited when Parkersburg got an Outback Steakhouse, that we go over there after football games and basketball games and eat cheese fries. Nice. But I had the fortune of coming to Columbus, went to Ohio State, went to Capitol Law School. I clerked for a couple federal judges here in town. And then I actually got my involvement in politics. When I worked for Cordray, he ran for attorney general in 2008. So I traveled the state with him and had every intention in 2008, when he won that race, of going to work as an assistant attorney general in his office, when I had the opportunity to go work at the White House for then Vice President Biden. So I was the deputy director of management and administration, which is like a chief operating officer role. The vice president has roughly 100 to 120 people that work for the office of the vice president. So it was really a COO, making the trains run on time, a role. But I got a chance to spend time with the vice president, as well as his senior staff, many of whom are now running his campaign. So it's really interesting, and I'm proud of the work that they're doing, to see the work now of them kind of running the vice president's campaign. But after a year, I came back and joined Rich in the Attorney General's office, and I was there for a year because my wife's a shoe buyer for DSW, which is based here at corporate headquarters. She's been there for basically about 15 years, nearly all her career. And I remember when I first got the call to go to DC, I pulled the phone away from my ear and I said, "Jenny, I just got an opportunity to go work at the White House for Vice President Biden." And she said, "That's great, but if you think I'm going to give up buying shoes for a living, you're nuts." So I flew back and forth every weekend for a year. And as you can imagine, that was personally and financially taxing, especially at the time we were newly married. So I came back and worked for Rich as an assistant attorney general. And he also allowed me to be cross-designated as a special assistant United States attorney. I did some work on prosecuting white-collar criminal crime cases in our community. But when Rich lost in 2010, is when I had the opportunity to serve as a member of Columbus City Council. I joined in January of 2011. I ran in November 2011, ran in November 2015, and now I'm the city attorney. And I feel so fortunate to be the city attorney. It's actually fairly unique to be an elected city attorney. I think that San Diego, Los Angeles, Seattle, and Columbus are probably the 4 largest cities in the United States that have an independently elected city attorney. Most city attorneys are appointed by mayors or councils. So to have the autonomy to be able to do things like criminal justice reform, to improve the system, to save taxpayer money, to make our community safer, that really excites me. And whether it's the decisions that we've made to do the theft diversion program, or to not ask for cash bail for nonviolent misdemeanors, absent unique circumstances, or the decision we made of not prosecuting low-level marijuana, the prosecutor has a really influential and important role to play in our community, every community across the country. And I take that role seriously. And everything that I do as it relates to criminal justice reform is first and foremost about improving the system for fairness and equity. The second is, will it make our community safer? And the third is, will it give economic opportunity to individuals so they can be taxpayers again? They can be the moms and dads they want to be again, so that we can improve all of our neighborhoods, because criminal justice reform is an area where rising tide raises all boats. If we can improve the criminal justice system, that improves community safety and neighborhood safety at its core.
Well, I'll tell you what, I have oftentimes argued that county government in Ohio, it needs to be reformed. That, you know, we have 3,069 counties across the country, and only in Ohio and Oklahoma is county government organized the way that it is here. And it is a fairly old and archaic way of doing business. But I have always said that if the time were to ever come that we were to reorganize county government in Ohio, the prosecutor should always be an elected position. And so it strikes me as odd that you tell me that very few city attorneys across the country are actually elected. I think it's important that the person who, one, represents municipal government or represents county government as the legal counsel, and is the legal counsel for the municipality or for the county entity, would not be independently elected from the rest of the elected officials. So I think it's very important. Appreciate you being on tonight. You did a fantastic job, and the citizens and residents of Columbus are lucky to have you.
Well, thank you, John. They're lucky to have you too, and send my best to Pam.
Well, she's sitting right here. She's been my trusty assistant.
My best to Pam.
I send my best to Jenny and to her mother for her birthday tonight.
All right. Thanks for having me on.
All right, I appreciate it. I want to remind everyone that a lot of the information that you got tonight, one, you'll be able to see if you go back through Facebook Live, you'll be able to see those websites on Facebook Live, the numbers, the phone numbers to get the access to choices and to the city attorney's line. You can also find the information on commissioners.franklincountyohio.gov/COVID-19. We're going to continue to host these commissioners' conversations, so keep watching for details. We'll always post the information on social media channels on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Nextdoor. Of course, we want to reach as many of our residents as possible. So if you're talking to friends and neighbors, tell them that we'll be streaming these information about these conversations on a regular basis on YouTube. Oh, by the way, Zach, Robin Ross from our staff would like to let you know that she grew up in Washington County, so she wants to say thank you for
us Appalachians stick together.
Yeah, that's right. So also, until next time, I am Franklin County Commissioner John O'Grady, and I just want to remind folks that it is important to stay healthy and stay safe. For my good friend, City Attorney Zach Klein, thanks for watching tonight. We will be on again a couple of shows next week. We are still finalizing details for those shows, but we will be on again next week for certain. So thanks, everybody. Take care and be safe.